What's up guys, Ryan here at Signature Edits, and inside of today's Lightroom tutorial we're taking a look at a plethora of photos together so you can download these free raw files at signatureedits.com/free-raw-photos and we can edit along together. Without further ado, let's hit that intro and get right into it. Alright, so I've got my photos downloaded from signatureedits.com/free-raw-photos in case you want to edit along with me. I'm going to import all of these. Thanks in advance to Gabe Martinez Photography for sharing his food photo right here, and the other anonymous photographers who uploaded their work. If you want to upload some of your own images to be featured, head over to signatureedits.com/free-raw-photos and hit the little upload button on the top for a chance to be featured. Okay, I'm importing all these photos into Lightroom Classic. Whether you're on Lightroom Classic or Lightroom CC doesn't really matter. All of these tools are pretty much going to be the same from one application to another. There's just a few things that you get in Lightroom Classic that you don't get in the other Lightroom, which I like for example the calibration and the ability to have adjustment brush presets. So you see how I have presets here. That just saved me some time for editing. So Lightroom Classic is definitely the one I recommend if you were considering between the two. Okay, let's get started. I've never seen these photos before, never edited them, so we're just going to have some fun together. So that's why I encourage you, edit along, see what you come up with. So for the first couple, let's just do a challenge. Let's try and do it with just nothing but tone curves. So I'm going to adjust my exposure and my white balance to feel pretty much right. Then from there, I'm going to do the rest of the editing in the tone curve. So it's going to be pretty simple. We're going to add a little dot here to the highlights, a little dot to the midtones, and a little dot to the shadows. Then I'm going to take my midtones down a little bit, take my shadows down a little bit. And here's before, here's after. We've already added quite a bit of contrast. We could raise our highlights a little bit if we wanted. And then we could roll off the whites to give us more of like a creamy sort of look. We can exaggerate that a little bit, just like so. So here's before, and here's after. Okay, now let's head over into the color channels of the tone curve and do something similar. So let's just decide how we want this photo to look. Probably we want to add a little bit of red to our midtones and our highlights because that's where the skin hangs out. We don't want to add blue to the skin because that'd just feel a little bit weird. So here's resetting that channel, and here's after. But we could add some blue to the shadows if we wanted to add a little bit of a tint to our photo. Make the skin pop off the page a little bit. And then head over to our blue channel and kind of do the same thing. So I'm going to take the yellows up in the midtones and the highlights. And that's by default going to bring them down a little bit. Oh, sorry. You can tell I'm a little sick, so I'm not thinking straight. I'm going to take the yellow, add a little yellow to the highlights and the midtones. And you can see what I'm doing because there's yellow on this side and blue on this side. So if you grab any point, drag it towards the yellow side, it'll add yellow to, for example, the midtones, or yellow to the highlights. And then if we do the other way, we can add blue. Okay, so here's before, here's after. Cool. And I like to add a little bit of green to my shadows, just to the blacks. So here's a little trick. If you hit a little point here in the shadows, then we double click on the far left, that's going to clip everything, and we can just add green to anything below that point. So let's just do something pretty subtle, somewhere around there. Before, after. Cool. Let's head over to our next photo. Now, oftentimes when you're starting out in Lightroom, you're like, where do I start? Where do I begin? What tools do I use? And you feel the need to use all of these. Whereas really, you got to look at it as you've got a whole kitchen full of ingredients here on the left or on the right. And so you've got all these different ingredients that you can add to your photo, but not every recipe needs every single ingredient. It's figuring out, okay, what do I want to make here? And how do I work with that to create what I want? Okay, so let's reset. And the first thing I'm going to do is add some exposure to make it a little brighter. Then the next thing I'm going to do is actually adjust the white balance. Now this white balance is not too far out from where it needs to be, but when it comes to winter photos, if you add blue to your photo, it'll make it feel more wintry, just that more cool vibe. Then the same thing, we're going to just play around here, add a little bit of magenta. So here's before and here's after. See how much more kind of wintry it feels just by adding that blue and the white balance? So sometimes rules are meant to be broken. You don't necessarily want your white balance set to where it should be, which is probably more around here. We want it set nice and low, a little bit more blue, a little bit more wintry feeling. Okay, and as promised, this one we're going to edit just with the tone curves again. So again, highlights up, midtones down a little bit, and shadows down. Let's go a lot a bit. There you go. Before, after. Massive change. Now, you might actually like that kind of more, let's call it dreamy, romantic-y, low contrast vibe, so we could try that as well. Maybe we'll just roll our highlights way back. And our whites way back. Something like that. Before, after. Cool. And of course, if you want to, we can go into our color channels, fiddle around there. Probably we don't want to, or I at least don't want to do too much here. We can maybe add some blue to the highlights. And there you go. Before, after. Now that's a little bit too blue for me, so we'll probably wind up adjusting the white balance back a little bit, somewhere like that. Okay, next. Got a nice portrait here. I'm going to start by cropping this white area out and this white area out, just because they don't add to the photo. They're kind of a distraction that I don't think is really going to cost us much to get rid of. There we go. So before, well, before, after. So a lot of editing is just getting rid of the things that distract you so that you're left with just what's supposed to be there. So it's kind of like somebody asked Michelangelo, I think one time, how did you carve David out of a chunk of marble? And he said, well, I started with a chunk of marble and I carved out everything that wasn't David, or a lion, or whatever he was carving. I can't remember. Okay. Now, if I were giving this to a client, it was a client's portrait, I might not necessarily get rid of that beauty mark, but because I'm just editing it for fun, I'm going to do it. I'm going to hit K. That's going to pull up my adjustment brush. And I'm going to go down here to my skin softener. And if you want these brushes, you can get them at signatureres.com. Just hit the preset button, and I do have them available. I think they're like $17. But they only work for Lightroom Classic. So if you're on normal Lightroom, not going to be too much. Or if you don't want to buy presets, that's fine. Just go ahead, pause the video, copy these settings, and you'll get somewhere in the ballpark. Okay. Now I'm going to do another brush, hit K again. Go over here to my add texture. And brush on like that. Now, I'm going to make sure my brush is set all the way up. Flow is up, good. I'm going to hit O so I can really see where exactly I'm painting. Good. I'm going to just go everywhere that I would normally sharpen. So lips, tip of the nose, eyes, something like that. Zoom out. And I can even do the hair. So let's just hit O again so you can really see it in action. It's subtle, but it is just adding a little bit more clarity, a little bit more saturation, a little pop. Just like that. And that's the thing about editing. Good edits, it's not taking one slider and jacking it all the way up. It's about slowly and incrementally improving your photo, one little step at a time. So here's before and here's after. Like pretty subtle so far what we've done. We've just softened out the skin. We've added a little bit of sharpness, a little bit of texture. Next, I'm going to work on probably just a little contouring here. Contouring, if you're not a girl who does makeup, is just the act of kind of enhancing shadows and highlights in order to kind of accent the face, the structure of the face, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the exposure down just a little bit on this brush, shadows down just a little bit, and then I'm going to go under her chin and just follow that natural shadow. So here's before, and here's after. So it's just going to give her a slightly sharper jawline. Now I could be a little bit more strategic here. Hit O so I can see what I'm doing and just erase. So I'm only getting it exactly where I want it. Right about there. So before, after. Now we can do the same thing, following other places. So under the cheekbone, for example, under the eye, just following the actual natural shadows that are already there. Under the lips, inside the lips. And that's just going to add some extra depth. So here's before and here's after. Okay, cool. Now these eyes are pretty darn soft, so I'm actually going to head down here to my sharpening panel and try and just take care of it there. Take my sharpening all the way up because I'm crazy. Hold down the Option key and grab this mask slider and grab it up until it's only sharpening the white parts of the image, which is kind of her hair, her eyes. I don't need to sharpen her skin because that will just enhance things I want to be soft. So somewhere around there. So here's before and here's after. And then we can play with our radius a little bit, make it slightly more pronounced. That might be too much, so we'll dial it back. And then your detail slider, of course, you can play with that. I'm going to leave it right around there. Okay, before, after. Cool, and this is just correcting the image. We haven't really done anything super stylistic at this point. Probably the next thing would be dealing with the background. By dealing, I mean just making it slightly less saturated, maybe a little darker, a little moodier, a little more out of focus. So to do that, I'm going to go up here to create new mask, select subject. Lightroom's going to think for a second, and beautiful, we have a subject. If we hit the apostrophe key on our keyboard, we can invert it, and now we've got the background. So I'm going to grab my exposure, take it down a little bit, texture down, clarity down. Dehaze, we could try taking down a little if we wanted. And sharpness, we can take that down. Okay, now saturation, also going to lower that. Probably around there. And we could even increase the contrast if we wanted to. So it all depends on your vision for the photo, but that's just making her pop from the background a little bit more. So overall, I haven't done anything super extreme here, but we're slowly making incremental changes. Let's head down here to the HSL. I'm going to take my yellows and desaturate them a little bit, and my greens. Cool. And then I want a little bit more texture and color in her hair because she has such gorgeous red hair. So I'm just going to paint on here with this brush. Contrast up. Dehaze up a little bit. Saturation up maybe. Maybe. And then play with the hue, make it maybe a little more red. Okay, like that. So of course, you could take your time, be more neat than I'm being, because I'm kind of making a mess a little bit. Good, just like that. All right, I'm going to take the exposure down just a bit. And her face is looking a little bit too bright compared to the rest of her. So I'm going to take a radial filter, which you can get to just by going up here. Or of course, Shift M. And right where her face is, I'm just going to take the highlights down a little bit, contrast down slightly, exposure down a little. Cool. We could even take the blacks down, that'll add a little more pop. Okay, before, after. If you like it, great. If you don't, do your own thing. Okay, fit. This is a nice fall photo. So to start with, I'm just going to correct things I'm seeing. Let's start by making it brighter. That's probably more where the exposure should be. And then we've got a little foreground that is too bright. So two solutions here. One, we could grab a mask, hit K, brush on there, and just darken it down. That's going to be probably too much work for me. So I'm just going to crop it like so. Okay, good. Next, I'm going to go in here, and we're really going to enhance the contrast just by adding a tone curve. And you can see a pattern at this point, like pretty much every photo, you use almost the exact same tone curve. And that little shape. Midtones up a little, highlights up a little, shadows down a little. And then you can just dial it in photo by photo. Okay, I'm going to warm things up. And then I'm going to select the background. So we're going to go to our auto mask, select subject, invert it again with the apostrophe key, darken it down, and then add some dehaze, some clarity. Maybe not the clarity. Definitely some dehaze. Something like that. Now because it's fall, we can definitely enhance the colors in the oranges and the yellows and the reds. But we got to be careful that we don't affect our subject too much. Cool, and then I'm going to take my yellows and my greens, take everything, and just work it so it's a little bit more magical fall color. Cool, here's before, here's after. And of course, there's a gazillion other things I could do, but I'm going to move on because there's so much more to edit. So I'm going to take my exposure up. I'm going to select my subject. Great. Invert it, select the background. Dehaze up. Now, one thing that I do wish Lightroom would let you do is multiple tone curves. Like, wouldn't it be cool if I could do a tone curve just on the background? I'm going to take the highlights up in the background, probably shadows down a little bit, whites up. Cool. Might even add a little saturation, see what happens. We got some weird blue saturation going on. So I'm going to know that I can go down to my HSL panel, somewhere over the rainbow. And I can desaturate those blues and purples because they're not really part of the photo. Oh, of course, you could also be adjusting the hue by accident. Cool. And of course, since she has a blue dress, we can't take that too far. But I'm going to adjust the hue of her dress. I feel like more of a navy would be nicer. Maybe I'm wrong. And now the weird part is that for some reason, these sticks very much connected to the blue channel. So what we can do here, select our mask, take the saturation down a little bit. Super weird how that's happening. Or of course, you can create another mask. And one way of countering purple is to just add green, so we can take our tint. You're going to see that's going to take care of quite a bit of that purple we got going on. Okay. Blend that in, take our saturation down. Yeah, Houston, we got a really weird situation going on here. So I'm going to have to erase this. Go back to my HSL. I can't take the blues up like that because it'll just affect things too much. But I can take my aquas up. Aqua. And we'll try it that way instead. So sometimes it's just figuring it out as you go, like, okay, what channel can I adjust here that's going to let me get the effect I want? So personally, I like that color of blue better. You might not. I don't know. And I'm going to just add a couple other effects here, just on her dress, for example. And her hair. Just want to add a little bit more pop to that. So contrast up, dehaze up. Press O so I can see my mask and just clean it up a little. Cool. Before, after. I like it. I'm going to stick with it. Okay, this one, we've got a beautiful green photo, and you can see that cameras just don't like greens. For whatever reason, they always look horrible. First off, you got to make sure your white balance is right, so probably somewhere around there is going to be a lot more accurate. So here's before, here's after. See how it cleaned up those kind of muddy tones? The next thing is we're going to go down to our HSL panel, and we're going to correct our greens away from that kind of mustardy grossness. Somewhere around there, and then our yellows will warm those up. And we'll take our saturation down and our luminance down. Somewhere around there. Okay, before, after. We're better. We're still not right, but we're better. We want to get closer to what your eye probably would have seen. So next we're going to just do our old tone curve. And then I'm going to hop over into my beautiful select subject mask. Invert it to select the background, and then we're going to try adding some contrast and some dehaze. Drop the blacks down. Okay, now we're starting to look a little bit more like real life, a little bit less crazy weirdness, a little bit more normal. Add a little more dehaze, brighten the photo up, drop our highlights, erase our shadows. Now I will say, like the main, let's not call it a problem, but the main challenge of this photo is the fact that it was taken in really, really harsh lighting conditions, in basically almost the worst place you could take photo, which is like in this super saturated green situation where we've got major color cast on her skin. The greens are just yucky overall. So it's going to be a challenge because our light is really, really not where we want it to be. So we're going to create a new mask. We're going to select our subject again. And this time we're just going to compensate for that green tint by adding some magenta somewhere around there. We can maybe brighten her up overall by adding some whites. That's a lot better. So here's her skin before, here's her skin after. It's probably a little too far, so we'll just drop it slightly. We could even lower the saturation just a bit. Okay. And then lastly, we're going to grab this dress. Try and add some blue to it, because it looks like that's the color it was originally. Sometimes your white balance is an easy way to add blue. Something like that. So here's before, here's after. And you can tweak it some more. We can maybe add some saturation back into those greens and yellows. Maybe I took it too far. You can play around with the tint some more, maybe make your greens warm. Personally, I think that's sort of the sweet spot, somewhere around there. Okay, moving on with life. This one is a beautiful photo, but way too warm. So we'll start by dialing in that white balance. Somewhere around there feels much better. We're going to dial back our highlights a little bit and raise our shadows a little bit. Lower our contrast. We got some really harsh light right here, some hot spots on her face. We're going to try and fix those in a second. Start with, I'm going to take the blacks down a little. Hit K on my keyboard. That's going to pull up my adjustment brush, and we're just going to soften this whole area down. So I'm just going to go down here, save some time, go down to my skin, soften and desat. But you can just pause the video, copy these settings, get somewhere in the same ballpark. So this is going to do two things. One, we're going to smooth out the pores of her skin. Two, we're hopefully going to tame down those hot spots just a little bit. See how they blend slightly more? Cool. Before, after. I'm liking it. Next, I'm going to take my tone curve. I'm not going to do too much. We're just going to raise our highlights a little bit. Just like that. Cool. And if you want to, you can add a little saturation back because I took some away. Or you can selectively add it, which is probably the smarter way. To her irises, her lips, maybe a little in the hair, but the hair already looks pretty saturated. So we're just going to add a little dehaze. Make them pop a little, tiny bit of saturation. Voila. Before, after. Cool. All right, this one, I'm going to start by playing around with the rotation and just see. We can go to photo, rotate right. I sort of like that. Yeah, I'm going to go with that one. I don't know. I don't know. We're going to start by adjusting our white balance, though. And honestly, this particular photo, it looks like the color profile is pretty much perfect. Like, I don't really feel the need to do too much to it. I can just clean up her skin. So start by going to our HSL. We're going to raise the luminance of her skin a little bit. Maybe the saturation slightly. Before, after. And then, of course, soften things up. Just a really rough mask because I'm not doing something super drastic. Around there, maybe. Add some detail back to her eyes, lips, hair. Texture up, clarity up a little bit. Maybe even some dehaze. And whites up. That'll just make things pop. Before, after. Good. And then she's got a couple little blemishes that we'll fix as well. Uno, dos, tres. Cool. And depending how crazy you want to get, there's some little specks here that are just slightly distracting. I'm going to grab those too. Cool. Before, after. Now, last of all, I might add a radial filter here to just darken the background slightly, or we could use our classic select subject mask. Voila. Okay, we got a beautiful wild, I don't know what that is. Let's call it a peacock. It's not, but that's what we'll call it. So, I mean, I love the moody vibe of this photo. I don't know how much I want to shift that, because if I went to my tone curve and I did my classic, one of these, yeah, we'd add a lot of contrast to the photo, which might be what you like. Bing, bang, boom. That's beautiful. Or we can maybe selectively add that just in a few certain places. So we're going to practice kind of our contouring again. Add some contrast, shadows down, blacks down. We're going to kind of do the same thing, but just selectively in the spots that we want. So kind of in these bushes, like that. That looks awful. We'll get to it on this rock maybe. And I'm kind of trying to find the places of like natural shadow. So we can zoom in here. Some natural shadow underneath Mr. Peacock. So here's before, after. And then we're going to do the same thing, but in our highlights. First, I'm going to correct these bushes because they're just atrocious. So let's take our flow down. I'm just going to like 50% erase all that out of there. Blending. Okay. I'm going to do the same thing, but in reverse. Take our highlights up, our whites up, maybe exposure a little bit of contrast. And again, we're going to go over Mr. Peacock. Do a better job this time. Let's zoom in. In fact, we could even just go select subject, save some time. Mr. Peacock, we're going to raise your whites and your highlights. We're going to lower your shadows and your blacks. Cool. He be poppin'. Okay, so here's before and after. We've just added some pop to Mr. Peacock. And then if you wanted, we could even enhance the mood of things a little bit more. We're going to go down to our Add Texture brush. This is one of my favorites, as you can tell. And just brush on the foreground here. So this way we're adding some contrast, adding some sharpness, adding some texture to the entire foreground, but without losing the kind of foggy, beautiful moodiness of our background. Cool, something like that. And then we'll maybe even pump up the dehaze a little bit and add a little bit of a tone curve, just not as much. Cool, I like it. That's what I'm sticking to. All right, this photo again, beautiful right out of camera, but what we could do is just brighten up our subject because she's very much in the shadow. Her little girl is not so much, but she is. So let's go select subject, see what happens. The light on them, very bright, very harsh. So the easiest way to brighten up a subject, I find, and like keep skin tones looking really beautiful, just lower the contrast. Isn't that crazy? It's like adding a spotlight on them, but without it being like way overdone. And then what we can do is take back our highlights a little bit, take up our shadows a little bit, take up our whites a little, and voila. Okay, add a little contrast to the image overall to blend it back in, and I think we're good. Okay, we've got this photo. Let's zoom in on her skin. So that's the first thing with a brush or with our spot removal tool. We're going to want to fix some of these areas. I would just like to know why it is that Lightroom can detect the subject from the photo, like do this amazing AI and mask it out, but it can't determine what parts to take for spot removal. It's just weird. Like this. Okay. So we're just getting the big stuff. I'm not worrying too much about it as long as it looks reasonably okay. Cool. I'm going to go over again. And of course, you could be much more picky. I missed a few. But for the sake of time, we're just going to go in here. Texture down, clarity down, dehaze down. Beautiful. Extend that all the way down. Okay, and then I'm going to go select subject here. Let's go. I'm going to take the texture and the clarity down overall everywhere and the dehaze down. I really feel like it's going to benefit because there's a lot of lines here. And I'm going to just selectively add back in. Contrast afterwards. So I don't want to take it too far, he said after going way too far. Put something around there, and now I'm going to go back and add it back. So we're going to go to texture. Bada bing, bada boom, doo doo, boo doo doo doo. want sharpness back. We're going to paint it on. Okay, before, after. Much smoother, a little bit too magenta-y maybe, so we'll adjust the skin tones here in a second. But one area that's still standing out, certain areas of her skin have this kind of like weird greenish tint to them. See, her hair just is like green. So I'm going to try and address that. Like that. Any areas that look too green. Cool. I don't know if there's a mixed light source or why that exactly is, but I'm going to try and track them all down. Okay. I'm going to add a little magenta to those areas. Not too much. And cool them down a little bit. Somewhere around there. Here's before. Here's after. And we could even desaturate them a bit. Okay, before, after. And of course, this I think would look best in black and white, so we're just going to try and transition it over. I'm going to take my saturation all the way down. I'm going to add some serious grain because nothing quite as beautiful as black and white with a lot of grain. I'm just a fan. What can I say? Good, and because now we're in black and white, we can do a nice vignette. Maybe drop our clarity down. Give us even more of that vintage kind of feel and take our dehaze up to compensate. And then underexpose just a little bit. Add some mystery to the photo overall. Okay, before, after. That's my vibe. You might like it, you might not. Tag me at Signature Edits Co so I can see what you come up with. Okay, we got just a couple more. I don't want to take this too far, but we're just going to go ahead. Same kind of thing. Brush on the skin. Soften it all down. You've probably seen a pattern by now, I hope. Cool. Another brush. Enhance the details. So we're going to brighten this up. Now, if you're ever brightening something, my suggestion, don't brighten with exposure because that's going to brighten shadows and the highlights. But if you just brighten the highlights, it's going to do kind of the same thing, but in a much more organic, natural way where you don't have to be as accurate with your mask because it's just going to grab things in a way that makes sense. Okay, so this side of her face, a little bit too dark, so we're just going to brighten that up. And I can do this without worrying too much because I'm raising my highlights and my whites, not my exposure. Cool. We got the same kind of weird discoloration, yellowishness going on over here that I'm going to try and address. Cool it off a little. Add a little magenta. So here's before and here's after. That's slightly too far. So we'll just take our magenta back a bit. Okay. And we can come down to our tone curve, add a little bit more pop if you want. If you don't, well, just walk away. Cool. I'm happy. All right, we got a beautiful food photo. Now, I'm no food photo expert, but I'm thinking this burger is the star of the show. So we're going to start by just going to select subject. See what happens. Okay, we've grabbed everything. That's okay. We'll just brighten everything up. Grab our highlights up. Yeah, maybe that's too far because we've now blown out the highlight on poor Mr. Burger. Something like that. Okay, before, after. It's already such a beautiful shot. I don't even know, like, what do you do with the food photo when it already looks amazing? But we are going to fix this little spot. Let's see if it's blown out. Yeah, it's pretty much blown out. So we're going to start by just taking our contrast down, our highlights down a little bit. Cool. And then I'm going to brighten up the burger just a little within the frame. Highlights up, whites up a bit. And I can probably extend that and just kind of do a little bit more contouring. Selectively just grabbing the highlights in the photo that I want to enhance. Okay, so here's before and here's after. Very subtle little pop we've added before, after. Quick and simple. Let's do the same kind of thing here. We're going to start with our exposure up. I'm thinking radial mask, so we can go down here, radial gradient, click and drag. I want to just darken everything else down. Maybe add a little dehaze to everything else. Okay, and I'm almost happy right there. Like, not every photo has to be super over-edited. You can just walk away once it looks good. But let's add a little bit of texture just for old time's sake. Because that's what we do. We take everything way too far. Before, after. Okay, and then overall, highlights of the photo can go up. Food tends to look really good if you've got really bright highlights, like high contrast lighting. So you can get away with pushing it further than most things. Before, after. I'm happy. Okay, so hopefully something in this video was helpful. If it was, do me a favor, can you hit that like button? Make sure to tag me at Signature Edits Co. with your edit so I can see what you're up to. And leave a comment below if you've got a request for a future video, an idea for editing, a suggestion for other people. Let's make this community a place where we help each other out. Okay, I'll see you in the next video. In the meantime, create something awesome. You are the best. See you later. Bye.